Welcome to the Trueface podcast, where we have conversations about what we can learn from what's going on in our lives. My name is Robbie Engel, and I'll be your guide as we learn how to increase trust and experience grace. Most of us get stuck in our relationship with God and others, and we end up wondering, is this really all there is to it? That's why we at Trueface exist to equip churches and individuals to experience deeper relationships with God and others in order to experience the peace and the freedom of the original good news. We're developing tools to help you do that in your lives and in your relationships. And it's the beginning of the year, 2023. And I'll do a shameless shout out to some cool tools that we have that are designed to help you experience deeper relationships with God and others, because a lot of you are re-engaging your small groups. Your men's groups, couples groups, women's groups, you're re-engaging your small group, fresh energy at the beginning of the year. If you're launching a group, we've got Embark, a 6-week study to help you launch or reignite your group. We've got the Cure for Groups, the training for small group leaders. And for everybody, we have this cool new assessment. It's like a 4-minute assessment to evaluate strengths and weaknesses of where your current group or your new group is at. So if you go to trueface.org, that's launching like yesterday by the time this podcast is coming out. And or if you go to thecureforgroups.com, check out this 4-minute assessment, share it with the people in your group, and it'll give you some direction on how to move the needle and the quality of your group experience as you re-engage. So a lot of us are at this pivot point of a new year. And with that comes a season to contemplate, to reflect the past year, as well as look forward in anticipation of goals or what's ahead of us. And on the podcast today, I've got my bestie, Benj Miller. This is a first for a three-peat guest to the Trueface podcast. So you're in special territory, Benj. Welcome back for the third time, man.
Thanks.
It's good to see your face.
Yeah, it was fun waking up this morning going, man, I wish I knew what the heck we were going to talk about so I could prep, but I don't. So this will be fun.
It will be fun. Last year, every year we get together as friends and go, hey, man, reflect back on the past year. What are you thinking about this year? And we process together. And we didn't get around to doing it. We said, hey, let's do that and just record it for the podcast last year. And the feedback was fun to listen in on the two friends talking about normal conversations we have on an annual basis. So we thought, hey, let's do it again this year. Make it a tradition. For those of you who have not heard the ones in the past, Benj is an entrepreneur through and through. Started his first company probably 19 years ago. Syrup, it was marketing, branding, multiple companies, but one I'm super proud of watching was started in 2021. Benj co-founded System and Soul. It's an operating framework that combines systems, organizational systems like EOS and Pinnacle does, and different small business ministry frameworks to decide where are we going and how we're going to get there. Quarterly goals, annual goals, 3-year goals. It's a system to help small businesses and organizations determine that. And the soul piece to the how piece in regards to the culture, the health, the identity, the people development side to marry or go in tandem with the operational side of a small business or ministry. How did I do on that?
You did pretty good. I feel like I almost want to pat myself on the back for indoctrinating you well, but I don't know if I can take any credit.
It is Benj helped us build a system when I was at North Point on why we do what we do, how we do it, an operating system, best practices of the business world, which ministries typically don't do well. And I cannot tie my shoes without an operating system and functioning now. Trueface runs off of it. So I love System and Soul. You've got coaches all over the country. If you're a small business or ministry, do it. But I'll actually plug something I really personally like every day. I signed up for a daily email that Benj made up, and I was like, oh, I'll do it as a friend. And like objectively, it's the only like weekly, daily email that I consistently actually read. I mean, I'm probably at like 80%. I actually read them. What is it? The 261.com. It's like a 3 paragraph, like couple, like 100 word nugget of leadership every day. It's a values based leadership thing, so you can send it to all your non Christian friends. But knowing that this guy's the heart and the brains behind it, the261.com, you need to sign up for that if you haven't already.
Thanks,
That's
man.
You didn't know you were getting that pitch. Did
I
that even
didn't.
matter?
I didn't. That
Well,
that definitely. I never would have even thought about that in our conversation, but we launched that last year, and so that was the
hmm,
first year of that, and it's been remarkable to me because I don't pay attention to how many people are opening or subscribed or who they are, but maybe once a week I get a really cool text message or an email saying, this is how this impacted me, this is how I just shared this with my whole team or our whole company, or we made this the cornerstone of our all staff meeting, like the ways that it's impacted into some people that I'm like, whoa, they are listening to what I have to say. Like that's pretty incredible. It's very honoring and humbling. A lot of it comes from my coach, honestly, and I feel like I'm in a unique position to be his voice to a new generation. And so
oh yeah.
we have this generation of leaders with a great opportunity to lead in a way that the world desperately needs, and they don't have many healthy voices to help coach them through that.
I've never actually even connected the dots that John Ritchie, your coach,
Yeah.
like he has discipled you. A disciple follows in the way, the shadow, learns from, emulates, becomes. And I read your 261, I'm like, this is Ritchie.
It
This is
is.
like
It
a
is. So
decade of
much of it.
Ritchie wisdom.
It really is. And he was never one to want the stage. His intentionality about pouring into a specific group of men consistently over a long period of time is remarkable. But he has no desire, drive, ego to need to be the guy that's known for it or on stage. I used to call him Yoda, just kind of jokingly, but he just oozed wisdom. But he never needed. He's not going to write a book. He's not going to start a blog. He's not going to get a podcast. And the world
Yep.
needs his voice. And so, there's been several times over the years. It started small. I was like, "Hey, can I reuse this thing that you did?" And he is just generous. Like, this isn't even his. It's wisdom. It's God's. It's truth. It's whatever. And so
Yeah.
if it can be helpful, then the answer is yes. And so it's cool. Like, I feel like the beneficiary of his wisdom in my life, but also the beneficiary to be the one to carry that forward.
It's what's super cool is in a lot of ways, I, uh, you know, John Rich, other than your dad, like I'm assuming John is one of the most influential men in your life, other than your dad.
Yeah.
In a similar way, Reggie Campbell has been one of the most influential men in my life, other than my dad. After about probably 7 years of intentionally investing and pouring in my life, Reggie died 2 years ago. Um, and and it's wild because you and I are next generation friends who are disciples of Richie, John Ritchie, and Reggie, and they were besties. They were like super close friends doing life together.
Yeah.
It's I've never thought about our relationship with each other and those guys as a microcosm of the ideal that we like when we think about healthy men and women who stay the course and finish well. A healthy, well-rounded, a relationally healthy individual, which translates into general health individual, has somebody ahead of them, beside them, and behind them. It's that holistic framework of who's ahead of you, who's
Right.
beside you,
Right.
and who are you investing in at a level of depth. And you and I each you had Richie and I had Reggie. They were beside each other, shaping each other, which in turn shaped how they shaped us. And we are continuing even an aspect of what they modeled of relationship with each other through those sources
Yeah.
vertically, which
Yeah.
is
And this was
And
worth
you and I met
camping
at
on for a
Trueface.
second because Reggie and John, along with Charlie Paparelli, I'm going to struggle to think who else is in this group. Is Pete in that group?
Yeah,
They
Lesher.
they were the first time I ever heard about Trueface is because they called themselves a Trueface group probably before there was such a thing. They just knew that that's who they wanted to be as a group. So this group of guys and again in a generation ahead of us, they stayed together for a long period of time, committed period of time. And the impact out of that group, you and I have been talking a lot about sages. Maybe we'll get into that, maybe we won't. But this was the group of sages. This was like having, the days when Tolkien and, what's the, drawing his
C.S.
name?
Lewis.
C.S. Lewis, thank
The
you. You know,
Yinglings, Yearling,
yeah,
whatever that group
yeah,
was.
exactly. This is like that, in the modern era. But one of the things that really stuck with me when I joined, I'm in a peer group that's led by John Ritchie, is his reflecting on being in a group, which is this group, this Trueface group, that you've got to invest and you've got to make time, but in some period over the course of many years, people die, your kids run away, your kids go off the deep end, there's lots of friends getting divorces, there's business issues, there's bankruptcies, there's all these things that come into life. And most people's option is to like walk into a counselor's office and spend 3 months on family of origin before they're able to walk you through anything. And the miles that you put in before you need them just reap so much benefit. I can walk into my peer group and be like, hey guys, I'm dealing with this. They not only understand business, but they understand how I got here. They understand my wiring, my personality, my tendencies, and they're able to be, as John calls them, healthy protectors. But it's because of those miles and this commitment. And he did what I think your ministry emulates in such a great way and has absolutely poured that into the next generation.
Man, I it's interesting because Reggie said a principle that as a disciple in some ways I have agreed with, put into my life, of more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact.
Yeah.
And they modeled that principle, which is counterintuitive in some ways to societal expectations of celebrity Christian platform. We spiritualize platform and reach, and both those guys have built lives. If you look at their calendar and their pace and their engagement, does it you get to ask the question, do our lives reflect that principle that we believe more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact? And that changes decisions because, like, I was in my men's group this morning and we were talking about, like, it's the opportunity cost of another deposit relationally is never worth it. Like, it's just the one-off deposit relationally is never worth it on the pro con list opportunity cost. But what you just said of like the years of deposits, until it pays dividends, it doesn't pay dividends, and therefore it's never worth it to have the sunk cost investment
Yeah.
long enough in order
Yeah.
to go, oh, that was the catalyst to change the game. And I am the recipient of Reggie's belief of more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact. Because with his level of leadership, influence, success, he wasted so much time on me. Like he was so inefficient and so stupid and foolish with how much accessibility he gave to me, how much time he gave to me, year after year as some dumb young guy. And I would argue that he was right in my own in
Yeah.
regards to the impact.
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody's ever reflected this back to you, but I would guess of all the guys that hundreds of guys that Reggie's poured into, but you probably reminded him a lot of himself. He probably was able to see young Reggie in you.
Yeah. Which is chemistry, which is probably why Reggie liked me more than you, and Richie likes you more than me, because you're more contemplative and insightful and business minded and all the other things.
There probably are some parallels.
Yeah. Well, we need to have Richie on here next. Richie, I'm coming for you as a podcast guest.
You should. I've done it twice on our podcast, and it's gold every time.
That's awesome. Thanks for plugging the System and Soul podcast, Benj, because I didn't. You can just tell us directly next time. Hey, joking about that before we pivot, Ben, with an intro, just for everybody to know, with Benj as an entrepreneur and success, he doesn't care about those things as much as Erica, his wife of 22 years now?
23.
23, 4 kids, and his relationship with Jesus. And so all that other stuff is appropriately secondary, which is sometimes unknown when you introduce a bio of a guest. So, so let's jump in. Benj said, "What are we talking about?" And I texted him and said, "Let's reflect back on something from last year and then talk about what's on our head or our hearts heading into a new year, just to reset personally as friends, and we'll record it in the meantime." So do you want to start reflection of kind of stand out where you're landing thinking about last year?
Yeah. There's really two things, and I'm not sure how well I can articulate this. So if I'm not clear, let's just talk it through. But they're related. But the first one is really in the power of knowing who you are. So, you guys are in a lot of ways an identity-based ministry. The Cure is an identity-based message. My story has been, ironically, I can see the story of identity, the thread of identity weaving through my whole life story. Like, even to the point where I help companies with their identity, like from a brand standpoint, from a culture standpoint, from who they want to be. So it's a bit of the pastor's always preaching to himself type thing. And I know this because I've wrestled with this. There's lots of things that I know, but I could never teach because I've never really it was just natural. This is not natural. This has been my journey. And last year, reflecting on last year from a business sense, I realized that I was trying to be really smart and really strategic about what we were supposed to do. And when I got to the end of the year, I looked back and we missed the mark on so many things. Like just where we wanted to be, what we thought the year would look like. We missed on so many things. But there were a couple things that happened at the end of the year that gave us feedback. When somebody came and said, "Hey, I've been researching you and all of your competitors. And I can find good things people say about all of them. But I can't find anything bad anyone has a whisper of about you guys." And that meant the world to me. And in that moment, all this thing hit me of like, hey, we're trying to do all this stuff, but what's way more important than that is who we're trying to be as an organization. And I think that both as people and as organizations, we spend so much time in what are the things we're going to do? What are our goals? What are our habits? What are the things? But who are we going to be? And how do we be strategic and intentional about that? One of the things, and this leads me to my second thing, so you can tell me if these are connected or not in your mind. But I want to go into 2023 being intentional with relationships, but instinctual with strategy. Because I'm really good at getting those backwards. I'll just be reactive with relationships if they come, if they go, if we talk, if we don't talk. And I'm very intentional with things in business and strategy. And, there's this intentionality to all that. My wife's reading a book and she just was sharing with me. She said that we all live in this river between the banks of chaos and rigidity, right? And you don't really want to be on the bank of either one of those. But as we flow through it, how do we flow through it, making sure that we are fighting the chaos, but also fighting the rigidity so that we can kind of sit in that sweet spot. And for me, I think for the next year, it's being more intentional with relationships, and more instinctual with my leadership in my business ventures.
Which is a flip for you.
It
You've been
feels like a flip.
inspirational.
It feels like a flip. And
All
you
right.
know what? There's an amazing calm that's already happened by trying, by, just even stating that, putting that out there, going in, we're in the first week of the year, right? So I haven't screwed up any of my New Year's mojo yet, but even just this week, the spirit is different when you approach it like that.
All right, let's put a pin in that because I want to come back to that for like next year. But before we put like in reflecting back on your last year, I didn't fully track the. You said power of knowing who you are. Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and this is probably be historically that's been a personal realization. Last year it was a business realization. In that story of that guy saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
you are who you say you are."
So you're saying power being who you are, like getting like settling into your strengths and in regards to quality more than growth, or
Yes, and knowing the strengths and weaknesses that we have. So there's the knowing part, and then super being okay being where you are right now.
yeah,
And saying, "Hey, we're not who we want to be in the future." But the who part isn't actually going to change. How we treat people, how we talk to people, how we do what we do, we're not at a deficit there. We are who we want to be, even though we're not where we want to be. And if we had to pick, we should always choose to be who we want to be.
yeah,
And if we go into, I was really one of my big moments of 21 was the podcast you had with Dr. Roger Parrott. Am I saying his name right?
yeah,
His idea of opportunity leadership, right? Like
yeah,
that was like he was calling me out. Like I am a coach to companies to help them with their strategic planning. But yet, the times when I've operated in my sweet spot, I've way more operated in this, opportunity leadership mindset. And so,
yeah.
me wrestling with the dichotomy there, but also I think there's a beautiful both and. I think there's strategy and intentionality to the who we want to be,
Yeah.
and that is vital.
Yep.
And then I think there's still value in the what do we want to do? Where are we going to place our resources, our energy, our bets, our resources
Right.
that where are we going to focus? What are we going to do? There's still value to that. Love Mike Tyson's quote, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right? But there's still value in the plannings, value in the thinking, value in the reflecting, valuing in the strategy of making the bet of where to put your energy. So, but
So you're saying,
all that to say, I think that we have to hold it all open-handed, and the who we are has to stay in precedent over what we're trying to do.
so the soul piece is getting weightier, and the systems piece is balancing to the soul piece of who we are. And for this, the systems piece of what do we do and what
Yeah.
framework, what do we execute our goals, just balance a little bit more weight to the contentment and presence of focusing on the who we're made to be presently and
Yeah.
having a little more open-handedness for the outcomes that will that will be a byproduct of the systems we'll do. Systems are good, but Roger Parrott was talking about like the outcomes, where that leads, the longer term future. Trust God with that, with a little bit less pressure and expectations.
That 100% it. You nailed it.
Which One thing I heard, and just to reflect back what I heard, because you said like power of knowing who you are, and then you said you tried to be really smart and strategic, and I'm like, wait, you like that's how I see you as a friend, really smart and strategic. So then it's like, wait, what? I don't. That threw me for a minute, but what I think I heard you say is smart and strategic. You connected to growth and building businesses and hitting numbers, like smart strategic, and in that failure of hitting those expectations and numbers, you realized the value in probably how you had diminished the focus on who you are and who you will be from a quality. You're focusing on growth over quality because you're
Yeah.
smart and strategic, which
Yeah.
is easier to think on goals and growth, and
I think
and
you're
maybe
right.
just
I don't know that I'd say that as like some big universal truth, but for the season that we were in
yeah,
and have gone through, absolutely.
yeah. All right, we'll come back to the Roger thing because that has to do with how I'm thinking about next year a little bit too.
Love it.
Roger Parrott, opportunity leadership. It's a paradigm shifter and an amazing man who loves Jesus. He was on the podcast. Read his book, but I'm thinking about last year for me. Last year was weird, man. Like I went in with a goal of like finding a new rhythm and a pace. You know, this like I have a 2.5 year itch like crazy as an 8 Enneagram entrepreneurial guy. And I was gonna hit that 2.5 year at Trueface. And I knew that going in last year, and those principles that I think I'm gonna be underwhelmed with what God does in the next 3 years and overwhelmed with what he does in the next 30. And I feel like God's asking me to learn how to pace as a marathon runner. But I'm built as a sprinter, and so it's awkward. I don't know how to do it. So that was my goal last year. Like figure out rhythms that are more conducive for like this new season that I feel 100% committed to and called to, and it's disorienting and annoying because it's not as natural for me. And I I was pretty good most of the year on the rhythms, the practice, the coaching, the counseling, the pacing to try to do that, to get healthier in regards to a pace. And I was assuming that would correlate to an aliveness with the spirit that didn't happen. And so what I ended up learning annoyingly was it was the first, for the majority of last year, I felt like I was in a season of waiting
Yeah.
on God, which is really annoying. Until my spiritual director was like, you know, your longings for God are a gift of Him, because anything attainable is not worth attaining. And so, if you could attain the longings of your heart, it wouldn't be worth attaining because there's always more. And therefore, to be in a dry season, what I was saying is a dry season spiritually, but have deep longing for more of
Yeah.
Jesus
Yeah.
is a better spot than I was feeling, because it was his gift of longing that he had given me. He goes, because I've seen a lot of guys in a season of dryness who don't have the longing, and that's a dangerous
Mm.
spot of abdication, passivity, just kind of doing it. But my longings have been huge, and my rhythms were good. And usually the rhythms of my life, like patterns, pace, like
Disciplines.
spiritual
Yep.
disciplines,
Yep.
usually when those are great, I feel alive spiritually. And the best I can say of when I feel alive spiritually means my mind wanders to the goodness of God more frequently throughout the day. Like when I'm
Yeah.
frequently thinking of God's goodness and prayer, and awareness, that's where I feel most connected to alive spiritually. When I feel dry, my mind wanders less to that. There's been a 1-to-1 correlation most of my life. Better rhythms, more of my mind wanders to God naturally. And this was the first year where it's like my rhythms were great, but I felt dry spiritually, or
Yeah.
like this, like something more that I haven't experienced. And usually I get distracted after, like if it doesn't work in a
Yeah.
month of like
Yeah.
emotional byproduct of this like consistent pursuit of God, I'll get distracted with something. But this one's different, man. Like nothing, the distractions are, nah,
So
I
I've
don't
watched you.
want.
I've watched you on this journey, and like mad props, because the level of, you call them rhythms, but the amount of discipline that you've had through that season, through that journey, has been remarkable. And I've seen it impact the rhythms and disciplines in the other areas of your life. So just by that default, there's probably some benefit. But here's my question. Do you think you were, for lack of a better way to say this, do you think you were trying too hard?
This is the first time in my life the rhythms weren't because of trying. I mean, they really are a byproduct of like, I'm just, everything else feels blah. And I'm like thirsty for really actually experiencing more of him or something that he has for me. And so the other stuff just seems like it is a real longing for experiencing more of him.
Yeah.
And therefore it doesn't feel like trying on this one. It did at the beginning of the year. I just like started building like the practices in order to, like, discipline often leads to desire. It was heavier discipline at the beginning, which is usually more trying too hard. But this one wasn't for anything other than a pretty authentic, like, I'm not doing it to get anything other than just like, I want to show up and keep waiting on him because I think what he has for me is worth it.
Yeah.
And that's this weird way. I've never waited on God in my life, really. And so it's almost like this, like, do I actually believe that what he has to offer us, like really experientially on this side of heaven, is significant enough to wait 10 years for and
Yeah.
prioritize and cut out all the other noise and figure out rhythms and pace to pursue only him? Would it be worth it if I get like what I would say is like a dull response? Would it be worth waiting? Because I was like 4 months into this going, oh, I'm like, wait, is this not even good enough to wait on? Or like if Emily, I don't know, weird analogies, but like how good is something to worth waiting for, you know? When I was in love with Emily, I would wait, you know?
Yeah.
And with what God has for me, is it worth waiting for?
Yeah. This is the second conversation I've had this week, about around the idea of the waiting. And one of the CEOs that I coach, she's absolute rock star, runs a big company. And she was saying, I'm going into this year and I've always known what needed to be done. Like there's always the next step in the progress, the evolution, the problem to fix. And she said, right now, I don't know. And I feel like I'm supposed to be in the waiting. And so it led to this whole conversation. I'm not going to recap it. I'm going to actually spin it on you and ask you, what do we do in the waiting? Because the waiting is like this period that comes along for everybody multiple times at different parts of life. What do you think, universal truths, what do you think we do in the waiting?
It was a big deal when spiritual director said, that's an awesome spot. Like, like he reframed it in regards to like, where's that longing coming from? That's a gift of grace. Like that's a gift like only God can give you. You can't manufacture a longing for God. That isn't even as a gift. And when he said like anything attainable isn't worth attaining, like I'm messing up the quote. He said something more insightful, but that principle of like, oh yeah, there's always more with him.
Yeah.
And the expectancy of waiting for him, the patience, it forces me to be a little more patient. If the byproducts of waiting maybe is a way I'm thinking of this. The byproducts are, it gets into what I'm working on this year, like the present, the less living in the potential of tomorrow and more okay with it. Just forces contentment and presence a little bit more, and a reframe of that's just a good spot. Like I don't want to get through the waiting and have missed the positives of this season. But I don't know.
I
I gotta
love
think
that.
more about it. Don't have the answer for it. All
Here's
right,
here's
so
one other thing that
yeah.
I'll add to that question is I think that we have, a human condition that we are the center of the universe. And so what if your waiting isn't even for you? And what if that, you're waiting for some payoff in 10 years to, the dividends, and they will come because, anything you invest in over a long period of time will reap the benefits. But what if whatever you're doing right now isn't even for you?
Yeah. And I hear mentors like Richie in their head and Reggie listening to this conversation, and I know they're smiling at me right now. They're like, "Oh, sweet young Robbie at 40." Like finally you're finally getting tired of you being the center of the universe and your giftedness and abilities being able to find what you're looking for. And
Yeah.
our Father loves you way too much uh, in the second half of life to know that, like, there's some things that the good stuff, the deeper level stuff, comes through receiving, and we can't earn it. And this is the first time in my life, I think, connected to the waiting, that I can't read my way into manufactured discipline, which is the trying harder piece. I don't feel like I'm trying harder because I know I know. I can't read enough, pray enough, do enough to get to what I'm longing for, which has to do with receiving something that I can't find. And
Yeah.
therefore it's this weird, deep knowing that there's a richness that's ahead, and that's where I should be on this journey of following Jesus. In a and it's okay that in my 30s as a high driver, I hear Reggie and John Ritchie saying to us right now, like, you're where you should be. And
Yeah.
he loves you too much to let that work in your disciplines and rhythms to produce a connectedness, because he's got more for you that'll come through receiving and being with him. And so they're smiling, going, "Oh, the impatience and the lack of, you know."
You just made me smile because I can picture that too from both of them. And one of the cool things, attributes that they share, very different people, but they share, is they weren't naive enough to think that they could impart 60-year-old wisdom on 35-year-old Benj and Robbie. Like, there are seasons of life, and so we're not ready for their sage level. Like, we had to go through our own journey, so they didn't try and fast forward our journeys.
Yeah.
They were just there with us in ours.
Oh, but even the fact that we can process what they're projecting onto us means that we've watched enough and listened enough to know, to at least have a handle, to not be stuck longer than we need to be, which
Yeah.
is really
Yeah.
all we can do in discipling. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. There's a patience that these guys have of, like, you're right where you should be, but their example gives us a handle that there's more, and it spurs us, and a framework to, I don't know, does it help us not get stuck as long? Or, like, what is their example and their mentorship, just
Well,
in your
I would say
conversation?
I would say that we definitely get out of ruts quicker, but also to have a friend while we're stuck in a rut is just as important.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the objectivity that comes with relationships that we can't do of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So next year, I'll transition into next year, and then we'll go back to the opportunity leadership thing. This is the most underwhelming year for me in regards to, like, goals, different excitement, passion, which is indicative
Yeah.
of this continuation of a waiting season for me. Where I'm heading into this year wanting to deepen um, these rhythms. It's just a continuation of last year. Like, I want to keep waiting, deepen these rhythms, and yeah, and stay the course in this. That's one of the thoughts for me. Yeah.
What's your number one desire for this year for Trueface? If by the end of this year you could say we did one thing, what would it be?
We continued to be who we are as a team, individually, practicing deeply, and modeling living into these truths personally and trusting God with the opportunity leadership, the gusts, the winds that we're quick to follow the movement of the Spirit and whatever God has in store. We have our plans for growing the reach of Trueface Journey and sales and new studies and new book. And at the end of this year, like what's weighty is this new book project, the that we're how do we articulate the gospel of grace to a next generation is a lot of our prayers and mind share going to that. So if we were patient and proactive, really intentional in developing that, and God blessed it and had
Yeah.
His favor
Yeah.
on it. Every book you could tell if His favors on it or not. But if it is, and if we can create a tool like the Cure has been powerful in kingdom work because they articulated a message of grace and identity to around a problem in a generation that's pleasing, striving versus trusting was a problem of Gen X and boomers more than it is millennials and Gen Z who aren't pleasing, striving. It's more swung to the law of license
Yeah.
away from the law.
Yeah.
And so, how do you articulate grace identity to a next generation ear? That project is weighty, but I think who we are and trust in the winds of the Spirit, and that's the opportunity leadership thing, which is different. Like, will we be quick and secure in who God made us uniquely as a ministry to trust the winds of the Spirit and where He has us to move? Because I could see Him moving in a couple big ways, and I don't want to manufacture that or force that, especially if I'm going to pace like a marathon runner
Right.
and
Right.
make it for the next 20 years.
All right. I feel like you were a little political on that answer, but I'm going to let it slide because it's all good stuff.
What about you? Like what's your desires professionally
Yeah.
next year or person?
So when we launched System and Soul, we kind of the standard playbook out in the universe is you've got to have a anchor tenant book, kind of like you guys do. Got a
Yeah.
couple of them at this point, but we needed one. So over the first year and a half, I wrote it twice and, got to a draft and went back and read it and just rolled my eyes like nobody wants to read this. And I don't want to put anybody through reading this. And so it got me thinking, what is the book that's actually inside me? What is the thing that I want to say? And it got me reflecting on the journey that I help companies transition through. And there's lots of tactical stuff, but nobody really talks about the journey that the leader needs to go through in order to make those transitions. And so I rewrote it with help, of course, but in the last quarter, and just over break, kind of gave it a break, and then came back and reread it, and I was so energized by it, Robbie. I'm like, this is it.
Oh.
I can think of people that I'm like, I want them to read this, and they need to read this, and they're gonna be so happy to read this, and they're gonna feel validated, whatever. So like, there's so much good stuff in it. It's called Renegades, and it's really the transition from a renegade founder, somebody who founded this thing, to a renegade leader and what that looks like. So I'm not trying to, I think the world says, hey, you are a renegade, but if you want this to scale, you got to knock it off. Right. And so you
Yeah.
either get a leader that's disenfranchised, like, well, I'm going to go do a side hustle, or you get, a leader that can't make the transition or just checks out and turns over the whole thing. But the organization needs the renegade leader as much as they needed the renegade founder, but you've got to become a different person in that transition. And so I'm so excited because I think that is going to be freeing for a lot of people, and give them a path to do that while actually growing in the freedom that they wanted as a founder entrepreneur,
Yeah.
instead of being kind of a prison to the thing that they've already built. So my number one goal for the year is to launch this book well. It'll probably be Q3. Because I just want to take our time with it. I feel like it's important enough to not rush. We could probably have a publishable version in like a month if we wanted to, but it's just it's
Yeah.
important enough. It feels weighty enough to just go slow. And then the rest of everything else, that's the number one, and everything else is really a focus on people for me. Like back to the relationships, work. My wife and I are going to go to therapy for not the first time in a long time, but we've identified some ways that we don't feel 100% free to be ourselves around each other, which is like, that sucks. So we've got to get some help kind of working through that. For me personally, it's a continuation of last year, but just working on my ability to be present, which has always been a struggle for me. We actually, as a family, committed to two things. We are starting a little home church. So first one's this Sunday. So we're actually committed, not just we said we'd do it. It's happening. And then you and I worked on this, so you know about this, but like putting together this reading plan for our kids as they go through different grade levels in preparation to leave the house is really energizing. And I pitched it to my kids and they did not revolt. So we're off to a good start.
That's awesome. What we get to the end of the year, what do you think the Father's hopes for your heart is in all of that? Counseling, the home church, the family dynamics, for your heart, what's your hope?
Well, I'll give a little bit of a default answer, but I think God is a God he wants redemption and freedom. So I think he wants that for me, for my family. And so it's life is a journey toward that. Obviously not a destination, but toward that from a very, very personal, this is something I've been reflecting on. Somebody asked me the question, great question. What do you think great leaders think about? It's an interesting question. And I said, the greatest leaders that I could, as I went through my mental Rolodex, for the younger listeners, a Rolodex was the thing you had on the desk. I'm just kidding. All right. So my mental Rolodex of like the great leaders, like what is my perception of what they spend their energy thinking about? And it came down to two things: possibility and gratitude. And so like, if I got to the end of the year and I said my heart was spent the year in a spirit of possibility and gratitude, that'd feel like a massive win.
I love that. And it's connected to your more practical goals of the principle of more intentional with relationships and more instinctual with strategy, flipping it and adding the intentionality around the relationships, even down to counseling with your wife, reading plan with your kids,
Yeah.
frequency. That intentionality of relationships correlates to contentment and presence. And I've got mine's a little when I'm thinking about this year. Well, hold on. The possibility and gratitude piece; those feel tension before I can't transition in my head yet until I understand this. That you're thinking possibility, the potential of living into tomorrow, the potential of tomorrow. Leaders see ahead and plow the course. But gratitude is a very present contentment thing. Most leaders I know are better at the possibility than the gratitude piece, which makes them great leaders. And so it's a tension to manage. It feels like to have a proactiveness and a deep contentment, and that correlates to gratitude.
I agree with you. I think that we're in a unique season of American culture where possibility is, there's not enough of it. Optimistic energy around what could be. It's the questions of like, what if and could we, should we, a possibility, my definition of a visionary leader is somebody that sees something that doesn't exist and they figure out how to get there, right? So that's a world of possibility. But if we're doing that without gratitude, then we're striving. right? And they're and you, if both of these are energies, if generosity, gratitude, and possibility are both energies, they feed on each other in a very healthy, positive way. Yes, I am absolutely grounded. My gratitude has me working, not out of a place of want, right? So I am grounded through my gratitude. But if you're truly grounded in that gratitude, then your ability to open up the world of possibilities is just healthier. It's better energy because those two are tied together. Does that help? That's kind of how I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, it makes me think of a river. One bank would be possibility, one bank would be gratitude, and they would both flow. You find that balance and they push each other towards. How about that? Um, Here's what spun it for me: the gratitude, the possibility piece is one of the realizations of how God's made me, and one of the byproducts of that is a couple months ago, I had this moment of contemplation where I don't think I've been present for most of my life. I'm turning 40 in a few weeks. Like for most of my
Yeah.
life, I haven't been present, which is everything I care about is relational. To love God and love others. That's a relational byproduct. That's all that I care about. And it's becoming more and more a weight and a passion as the what the world offers and the winds and the other shiny things get
Yeah.
proven to be as dull as they are. It just
Yep.
heightens the foundation of like love God, love others. That's relational. And I haven't been present for most of my life, which is like this ceiling, this barrier of intimacy and connectedness and presence, um, relationally. And I think that's because I know God's my strength of seeing the future and the potential high drive, high achiever,
Yeah.
seeing it in the future. I live in the potential of tomorrow, which drives all my current decisions. And my open loops in my head are revolving, and the engines of my brain that get in the way of me being present are because I spend too much time on that side of possibility and
Yeah.
not presence, contentment that are correlated maybe to gratitude, maybe to a different
Well,
word,
so
but
let
that's
me put a spin on this whole thing because I left out something giant. But this idea of possibility and gratitude applies to our relationships too. Because if I'm sitting here having this conversation, just so grateful, I can be pissed off about the one thing that you did that one time or whatever, or I can just sit here and be, man, I've got a great friend. This is an awesome opportunity to have this conversation, and some of the world of possibility is on your behalf, is in the person of Robbie. Robbie, I see a possibility in you you might not even see in yourself, right? And that's probably more important, the relational possibility, the relational gratitude, and how it can force us into the present. So that's how I'm using that too.
I love that. It's like there's a real principle that more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact and channel energy. Um, so so connected to one of my things for this year. That was a trigger on the tangent, but this is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
connected. I'm not present. So one of my goals of this year is like I want to, when I'm looking ahead at the year, I want to I was great at rhythms. Now I want to deal with some source issues, fears, drivers. I want to do some deeper work now that the rhythms and balance and structure is a little bit better in place for my training to be a marathon runner. I think God has some awareness for me in some things that are in the way at deeper levels. And so, and some of that has to do with what's in the way of the presence, the
Yeah,
contentment, the
yeah,
difficulty, and all that. Because I deeply desire to be present, more present relationally with my kids, my wife, which connect with God, which connects to intimacy. And I built rhythms last year, like on my rhythms with God. I cannot look at a screen until like 9 o'clock in the morning so I can spend really good time with God. As soon as I look at a screen, it triggers my brain and I can't shut it off enough to be present with God. So that's a discipline that's helped structurally. The
yeah.
structures are in place now. What are the underlying dynamics of like stuff? But I was reading a book, The Benedict Option. That's got me thinking. It'll get you thinking. Benedictine monks in like the 600s, they lived in a society that was so not it was so different than a system and a culture that would be conducive for following Jesus, that the Benedictine monks said, in order to preserve this way of life of following Jesus, we have to get out of culture because it's so different in order to preserve and holistically follow Jesus. So he's saying, in a post-Christian society with changes from technology to to cultural norms, we're in that time where he would say Christians need to almost pull back, which is counter to the faith we grew up in, which is like you got to engage in the world. And he's like, nah, we're like 2 generations away. As noisy and significant as the current is now in a post-Christian individualized world, there has to be elements that pull back to preserve, or else we're 1 or 2 generations away from assimilation into a secularized culture, and we're Europe, right? So I don't agree with everything in the book, but it was a catalyst to thinking of going, what aspects of society am I just swimming in without objectively zooming back and going, is this conducive for the only thing that matters in my life, which is experiencing and loving Jesus, loving God and loving others? And so practically, the thing that was in the way that I'm constantly fighting against is screens,
Yeah.
in my own life, in my family life, with my kids. I long for presence with my kids, and I'm fighting Fortnite more, and I'm checking out with a show or scrolling my phone. And that's the thing that's in the way, in a big way, of like that intimate connection and presence with my kids. So today is the 5th of January. This is coming out next week. We're 5 days into a screen. Like, we went cold turkey, dude. Like, January 1st, whole family, for the month of January, we're doing 0 screens in our house, and we're in detox right now, and it's intense. But I'll come back and process later how it goes and what we end up doing February 1st. But it's a major, like, my goal this year is to reset.
Yeah.
Like, I want to reevaluate and reset every aspect of my life to go, I'm going to feel ownership and responsibility for my life to figure
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
what it looks like to prioritize what matters to me. And I'm going to cut stuff out and be bold about it and not as passive anymore. And so that was the first thing in that holistic goal of really ownership and responsibility and no more excuses. That was the like blaring light of difficulty to what I desire with my family. And so we freaking went cold turkey, and kids are playing. I played a board game. So the first morning, January 1st, I wake up. We stayed up till 12 o'clock binging on screens, right? And then we wake up at 7:30 the next morning, and Emmy and Eli woke me up. Emily slept in. I went and got them. And usually we put them in front of Paw Patrol, and like that's our coat. And so I was like, what do I do with these two? Like, from waking up the family. And I read my 4-year-old's like 3 books, Benj. I was like, I haven't read these 4-year-olds a book in forever. And some of you are judging me right now, but you have 8 kids and come at me. It's hard, y'all. But I was reading my book, feeling like a good dad. I was like, I'm being a good dad right now. Anyways, that was like the first hour of it. I was like, I'm actually reading books to my kids. So I'll let you know. But that's an example of that's a practical to the bigger of like, I want to take control of rhythms in a disruptive way and ignore some societal normalcies. I want to be a little more different.
The idea of underlying, like what is the underlying, what is the roots of my inability to be present? Probably not the time to have this conversation, but I'm going to try it. So I sent you a text based off a conversation my wife and I were having in the car, and it was around shame. And I don't relate to shame very well. And so, which got me wondering, am I like just absolutely asleep to it? Like, do I subconsciously operate due to shame that I have? Or is it just not my thing? So you guys deal a lot with shame at Trueface. So give me free counseling. How would I even know? What would I look for? Because it's the same exploration that you're talking about. What are some of these underlying things in our lives that have control that we don't even know they exist? And if we can identify them, then we can start, we can start a process on them.
Um, yeah, I mean, we know guilt says you screwed up. Shame says you are a screw up. You know, guilt says you did something wrong. Shame says you are wrong. It's a belief. That's like the basic thing. But I think shame in general, yes, you struggle. All of us. This is a massive lower level foundational thing. And take the word out because the word is confusing. I think another way I'm thinking about shame is like, where are our perspectives of how we think about ourselves or see ourselves or beliefs about ourselves different than God's view of us? And it's just a deeper and deeper awareness, a deeper awareness at different levels of our life of how our views, our thoughts, our belief patterns, our functions of how we see life, see ourselves, which is a direct correlation to how we operate and respond out of that. Usually we focus on the behavior modification without identifying the source, and the source
Right.
is the shame. Really just means you see yourself in a way that's not true, not as true as how God sees you, which should be the foundational element of how you see yourself. That's why
Right.
if you drill everything down, it's a more accurate view of who God is and who he says I am. Shame just says an area that needs adjustment towards truth.
Mm.
So shame is any area of that belief perspective that needs adjustments towards more clear perspective,
Yeah.
which is foundational, which leads to behavior, emotions, feelings, all that stuff. So when you hear that, how do you what is that?
Well, number one, I'm glad I asked the question. Number two, it, it comes back to where we started our conversation. It's an identity journey, right? And so the identity journey is the restoration to who God truly sees me as, who I am because He created me and says I am. And so shame is just one of the. It's another word for the things that are misaligned between
Yes.
how I see it and how God says it. So that's helpful for me to have the context because I think I was operating under the idea that shame was this baggage that you carried, like this, maybe in a similar way to guilt, right? Like you feel bad because X, Y, Z. And so I didn't relate to that, but I can relate to how you just defined it. So that works. That's helpful.
Maybe here's a different, and I'm literally, we're supposed to be expert on this, and the Trueface tribe is listening to me, some of which are beyond my understanding in this. And so this is a very vulnerable spot. So I'm actually practicing what we teach by processing out loud a deeper understanding of shame. Bill Thrall, in case you're listening, going, why did we put him to steward this ministry? um, I wonder for you if shame presents itself differently, which is where it's like, I've never struggled with that. Maybe it's a reframe in how it presents itself. Shame, and if shame is it's a lifelong journey of more accurately aligning and adjusting to see God and ourselves more clearly the way he does, away from lies. And a lie is anything other than truth. If truth is how we see God and how God
Yeah.
sees us, then lies are away from that. And we will never, we will spend our whole lives dealing with this, processing deeper levels of and deeper clarity, more clarity, more clarity on that. So welcome, we're all in the process, right where we should be on that.
I love that.
But
Let me recap that because I think if I'm hearing you correctly, and I think this is important because it's helpful. Shame is just a word we use to identify the misalignment of how we live our identity versus how God sees our identity.
maybe, I mean, that I think it's more of it's how that surfaces, how the difference shows up is shame. Like that's the go-to where it shows up. Shame describes the expression or the show up of the difference of truth versus where we're living, how we're living into it, which is connected to how we see ourselves, our identity, connected to how we see God. And
Yeah.
that always transfers into our horizontal relationships with others. But let me unpack a little. If this is the expression of the gap and the delta, which we always have, which God loves us so much that He continues to reveal new insights
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
more clearly how He sees us and who He is, shame could show up differently. Shame in a lot of our lives shows up in a, a, a belief system or a verbal voice that is the easiest to identify. And that's what most of the books, the teaching, that's what you're thinking about when you think of shame. You're thinking that voice that says you're a screw up,
Yeah.
Benj,
Yeah.
you're a failure. So I think that's where some of us struggle more with that voice from our trauma, our past. So like the expression of the difference between God viewing us and how we view ourselves shows up in a voice that's like
Mm.
screams at us,
Yes.
you're an
Yeah.
idiot.
Yeah.
Um, that's what most of us think of shame. I wonder, and again, I'm thinking out loud here, if shame presents itself from more of a framework, an operating framework, that how you function, go about your relationships from a belief framework is impact that too would be impacted by false beliefs, which are lies from truth,
Yeah.
how you see God and
Yeah.
yourself. But your shame might show up in more of a framework for operating more than a feeling or a statement screaming in your head.
Yeah, I'm following you. I'm tracking. I think that's helpful because I think you nailed it when like the I interpreted shame as that voice in your head telling you, you know, you suck, you're not good enough, all those things. The one thing that came to mind as you were talking through that, there's the journey of identity is not just it's like different stages of belief. Like you have to hear what God thinks of me, what He thinks of you, and then you have to choose to believe it. And then you have to choose to act as if it's true, right? And that I think is where the ultimate test is, because our default's going to be to act out of what we thought was true previous,
Yes.
and the real transformation happens when we choose to say, I believe you enough that I'm going to do this thing that I wouldn't have naturally done based on my shame.
Yes. And I'm similar. Like the shame shows up in my fears more. Like me identifying shame narratives and beliefs come more quickly to me by going, what am I afraid of? Than what am I saying to myself that's a wrong belief. My dad told me, he told a friend of mine recently, what was it like to parent Robbie in high school? And my dad said Robbie was an arrogant a-hole or something like that.
Yeah.
I've been overly confident on the spectrum for most of my life. My dad would say arrogance. I would say confident. I don't know, whatever. So overly confident. So those messages of shame have been less, but the messages of shame in my life, like I should have done more and I should be further along. Like, I mean, that is like, ooh, that's right below the surface in regards to a lie that drives actions, that drives
Yeah.
impatience, that drives
Yeah.
lack of presence because I'm focusing on the potential of tomorrow because I see it and I should be doing it. And therefore, I know what I need to do today in order to address my fear of not living a life of purpose. I should have done more. I should have been further along. This internal drive that it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. How much of that fear is driving my actions, my presence, my emotions, my beliefs? And what am I missing from not more fully believing and and receiving that my father goes, Robbie, I got this. I love you. I don't need you to do anything more. I know that, but do I know it?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
gap in my
Yep.
maturing that hopefully gets smaller. And that's shame for me. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like
And I can see
that
how
lie.
that impacts your ability to be present because if you're focused on where you're not, where you thought you should be, it's hard to be where you are.
Which is how I see myself subtly of I
Yeah.
should be further along, which is a lie from how God sees me, which shows up in shame, but not in a voice of I failed, but more of a in the way of love because I'm focusing on doing and responsibility and pressure, which does not feel like the fruit of the spirit of joy and peace and patience and kindness and gosh.
Gratitude and possibility.
I don't think possibilities in there, but
No, neither one of them are. But
gratitude's one of the fruits, right?
that's
Thankfulness.
that's what it looks like for a leader to live in,
Yeah.
to show up with the fruits of the Spirit.
Yep. All right, man, we got a good year ahead of us. Benj, this is different for both of us. It feels more patient, both of our goals, than we have the past 7 or 8 years of us having conversations about what are our goals for the year. And I think you captured it well, of less reliance on growth, strategic growth, and more focus on intentionality about being and relationships.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's interesting because it's like less like goal tangible, but it's not without intention.
Yeah. Thanks, Roger Parrott, for
Screwing
messing
us
up.
up. Yeah,
You
yeah.
leaders.
That was strong. I appreciated his message.
It was. Benj, I love you. Do you want to pray for all of us? Pray us out, and we'll wrap up with that.
Yeah, man. Father, thank you for Trueface. Thank you for the posture of Trueface. Thank you for the message of Trueface. Thank you for your message. Thank you for the ways that you are working through Robbie and his team to make your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And I pray that in the waiting, the manna would be rich. And it may not be I'm not even praying for the promised land, but let the manna be rich for all of us. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Let it be so. Thanks, bud.
Love you too.